The silk of the Werewolf gown felt like a shroud against Ellen's skin, cold and suffocating. Outside the heavy oak doors of the great Pack Cathedral, the whispers of 600 high-ranking wolves rose like a tide of jagged glass. Inside, the air smelled of stale incense and the metallic tang of her own terror. She stood in the vestibule, clutching a bouquet of white peonies that were already wilting in her trembling grip. This was the moment. The happily ever after that had been promised to her since she was a pup, a strategic union to bind the Miller and McLean bloodlines. But as the heavy doors groaned open, the music didn't swell with joy. It stumbled into a discordant halt. Ellen McLean looked up, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, expecting to see her fiancé, Julian, waiting with a smile. Instead, she saw a man standing at the altar with his arms crossed, his face a mask of bored cruelty. Julian didn't move toward her. He didn't reach for her hand. Instead, he took a slow, deliberate step back, his voice amplified by the cathedral's acoustics, cutting through her soul like a silver blade. "I won't do it," Julian announced, his eyes scanning the crowd with a sickening pride. "The Miller bloodline is diluted. My father's ambitions are not mine. I reject this union. I reject her." The gasp that ripped through the room was deafening. Ellen froze, the world tilting on its axis. The humiliation was physical, a heat that crawled up her neck and stained her cheeks crimson. Her father, the alpha of the Miller pack, stood up in the front pew, his face purple with rage, but she couldn't hear his shouts. All she could see was Julian's smirk. The man she had loved, the man who was now tossing her away like refuse in front of the most powerful leaders in the territory. "She is a disgrace," someone shouted from the back. "Unclaimed. Rejected." Ellen felt the salt of a tear sting her eye, but she refused to let it fall. She looked at Julian, seeing him clearly for the first time. A boy playing at power, a coward who needed a public stage to feel strong. But the law of the packs was ancient and unforgiving. A woman rejected at the altar was a pariah, stripped of status, often exiled. "Is that your final word, Julian?" The voice that spoke didn't come from the pews or the priest. It came from the shadows of the high balcony, a deep, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate in the very stones of the floor. The room fell deathly silent. Every head turned upward. There, leaning against the marble railing with a glass of dark amber liquid in his hand, was the man everyone feared to even name in a whisper. Elias McLean, the Alpha King, Julian's older brother. Elias didn't look like a groom. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than most pack houses, his dark hair swept back from a face carved out of granite and old scars. He was the Cold King, the wolf who had executed his own cousins to protect the throne, the man who had famously declared that he had no room in his chest for a heart, let alone a mate. "My word is final, Elias," Julian spat, though his voice wavered. "She's nothing to me." Elias set his glass down on the railing. The sound echoed like a gunshot. He moved with a predatory grace that made the air in the room feel thin, descending the spiral staircase with a terrifying stillness. He walked past his father, past the priest, and stopped right in front of Ellen. He was a foot taller than her, a wall of pure, intimidating power. His scent, cedarwood, rain, and something dangerously wild, overwhelmed the sickly sweet smell of the flowers. He didn't look at his brother. He looked only at Ellen, his piercing gray eyes searching hers, looking for the break in her spirit. "A rejection must be balanced," Elias said softly, though his voice carried to the furthest corner of the hall. "The McLean debt to the Miller family must be paid. If the younger brother is too small to carry the weight of a queen, then perhaps the throne should claim what he was too blind to keep." He turned to the crowd, his gaze chilling the room to sub-zero temperatures. Then he looked back at Ellen and held out a hand covered in a black leather glove. "Ellen Miller," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate growl. "Your fiancé has proven himself a boy. I am a king. If you want vengeance, if you want power, if you want a man who will never let a hand touch you in malice again, take my hand. Marry me. Right now. In his place." The silence was so thick it felt like it could be carved. Ellen looked at the hand. She looked at Julian, whose face had gone pale with shock and sudden, soaring jealousy. Then she looked into the cold, silver eyes of the king. This was madness. This was a death sentence or a rebirth. Before I tell you what Ellen chose in that heartbeat of destiny, I want to say a huge hello to all of you watching. Whether you're tuning in from the misty hills of Scotland, the bustling streets of Tokyo, or right here in the States, I am so incredibly grateful to have you here. How are you all doing today? I hope your day is filled with way less drama than Ellen's. If you're loving this story of betrayal and royal power, please take a second to hit that subscribe button and join our community. It really helps me keep these stories coming for you. Are you subscribed? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love reading your replies. Ellen's heart stopped. She saw the trap and she saw the escape. With a hand that no longer shook, she reached out. She didn't grab Elias's hand. She gripped his forearm, feeling the iron-hard muscle beneath the suit. "I don't want a boy," Ellen whispered, her voice gaining a sharp, crystalline edge that made Julian flinch. "I want a king." Elias's lips didn't move into a smile, but his eyes flared with a sudden, dark heat. He pulled her toward him, her white dress fluttering against his dark silhouette. "Priest," Elias commanded, not looking away from his new bride. "Finish the rite. No. Or I'll find a priest who can." As the ceremony began again under the shadow of a different brother, Ellen felt a strange, cold thrill. She was no longer a rejected bride. She was the property of the most dangerous man alive. But as Elias's hand settled heavily and possessively on the small of her back, she realized something that made her blood run cold. Why did the cold king who wanted no one have his ring already waiting in his pocket? The silence that followed the Alpha King's decree was not one of peace, but of 1,000 unspoken threats. As the priest's voice droned on, rushing through the ancient vows as if the floor were catching fire, Ellen felt the weight of the crown before it was even placed upon her head. To the 600 guests, she was a pawn who had miraculously landed on the winning square. To Julian, who stood off to the side with his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were white as bone, she was a trophy he had discarded only to realize it was made of solid gold. But to herself, Ellen was a ghost. Growing up as the daughter of Alpha Silas Miller, Ellen had been trained for grace, for diplomacy, and for the quiet endurance required of a high-ranking wolf's mate. She had spent 24 years perfecting the art of being just enough. Just beautiful enough to be envied, just quiet enough to be manageable, and just loyal enough to ignore Julian's blatant infidelities and mounting arrogance. Her deepest desire had never been the throne. It was simply to be seen. She wanted a soul who looked at her and didn't see a pack merger, but a woman with thoughts that outran the wind and a heart that burned for more than a ceremonial title. Her greatest fear? Being a shadow in her own life. And as she stood next to Elias McLean, the man known as the Glacier of the North, that fear felt like it was freezing her from the inside out. Elias was a mystery wrapped in a suit of armor. He had taken the throne at 25 after a bloody coup that had seen his own uncles exiled for treason. Since then he had ruled with a cold, surgical precision. He didn't take mistresses, he didn't attend the decadent pack balls, and he certainly didn't show mercy. He was the protector of the realm, the apex predator, a man who functioned on logic and iron-fisted law. As they moved toward the cathedral exit, now legally bound by blood and spirit, Elias's grip on her arm was firm, not painful but unyielding. He walked with a stride that forced the crowd to part like the Red Sea. "Don't look at them," Elias murmured, his voice a low vibration that only she could hear. "They are looking for a crack in your mask. Don't give them the satisfaction of a single tear." "I stopped crying the moment your brother opened his mouth," Ellen replied, her voice surprisingly steady. They reached the grand steps of the cathedral. The sun hit the white marble, blindingly bright, but it did nothing to warm the atmosphere. Standing there was Ellen's father, Silas Miller. His face was a map of conflicting emotions, outrage at Julian's insult, and a terrifying, greedy glimmer of hope at his daughter's sudden elevation to queen. "Ellen," Silas started, stepping forward. "We need to discuss the terms of this sudden change. The dowry and the border territories." Elias stepped in front of Ellen, shielding her with his massive frame. The air around him seemed to darken. "The terms are simple, Silas. Your daughter was publicly humiliated by a McLean. I have rectified that insult by giving her my name and my protection. From this moment on, she is the Queen of the North. She is no longer your daughter to bargain with. She is mine. Any further discussion of territories will be handled by my ministers, not at the foot of my wedding altar." Silas blanched, stepping back. Ellen felt a strange surge of warmth, not love, not yet, but a fierce sense of gratitude. For the first time in her life, a man had stood between her and her father's ambitions. As they were ushered into a black, armored limousine, the heavy door thudded shut, plunging them into a quiet, leather-scented intimacy. The transition from the chaos of the cathedral to the silence of the car was jarring. Ellen sat as far from Elias as the seat allowed, smoothing the silk of her dress. "Why did you do it?" she asked, her voice small in the cavernous interior. "You don't even know me. We've spoken maybe 3 times in 10 years at formal dinners. You've always looked at me like I was a fly on the wall." Elias leaned back, his long legs stretching out. He pulled off his leather gloves, revealing hands that were calloused and scarred, the hands of a warrior, not just a king. He didn't look at her, he looked out the tinted window at the passing city. "Julian is a fool," Elias said simply. "He thinks power is about saying no, to prove you have a choice. He didn't realize that by rejecting you he was creating a vacuum. I don't like vacuums, Ellen. They lead to instability. And I've had my eye on the Miller Pack's resilience for a long time. So I'm a strategic asset," she whispered, a familiar bitterness coating her tongue. "Just a different kind of merger." Elias turned his head then. His gray eyes were like storm clouds, turbulent and deep. "Everyone is an asset until they prove they are a liability. But do not mistake me for my brother. He wanted a trophy to neglect. I wanted a partner who understands the cost of silence." He reached into the pocket of his vest and pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't offer a romantic speech. He simply took her hand, his touch was surprisingly hot against her cold skin, and slid a ring onto her finger. It wasn't the delicate feminine diamond Julian had given her. It was a heavy platinum band set with a raw black diamond, surrounded by tiny emeralds. It felt heavy. It felt like a tether. "That ring belonged to the first queen of the North," Elias said, his gaze fixed on her hand. "She was said to have more fire in her blood than the wolves she commanded. I expect you to live up to that legacy." Before they reached the royal estate, the car slowed down at a security checkpoint. Crowds had already gathered, tipped off by social media. People were holding signs, some mocking her, some cheering for the king. "They'll call you the accidental queen for a while," Elias noted, his voice devoid of emotion. "They'll wait for you to fail. They'll wait for me to tire of you and send you to a countryside estate to rot." He leaned in closer, his scent filling her lungs, making her dizzy. "Is that what you're going to do, Ellen? Are you going to rot?" Ellen looked at the black diamond on her finger. She thought of Julian's smirk, her father's greed, and the whispers of the 600 guests. She looked Elias square in the eye, her jaw setting in a line of pure steel. "I'm going to make them forget Julian McLean ever existed," she said. For the first time, a ghost of a smile touched Elias's lips. "A dangerous, fleeting thing. Good. Because tomorrow the real work begins. My court is a den of vipers and they've been hungry for a long time." As the car pulled through the massive iron gates of the king's sprawling estate, Ellen caught sight of a figure standing on the balcony of the guest wing. It was Julian. He had arrived ahead of them, his face twisted in a mask of loathing and regret. Elias saw him too. Without breaking eye contact with Ellen, he reached out and tucked a loose strand of her hair behind her ear. It was a gesture of such unexpected tenderness that Ellen's heart skipped a beat. But as he did it, he turned her face slightly so Julian could see the intimacy of the moment. "Welcome home, my queen," Elias said loudly enough for the wind to carry. "As we move deeper into the walls of the king's palace, where the shadows are long and the secrets are even longer, I have to ask, what would you do? If the person who broke your heart had to watch you marry their more powerful, more dangerous sibling, would you take the chance for revenge or would you run for the hills? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe. We're about to see just how cold this king really is when the doors close." Ellen stepped out of the car, her head held high, the train of her wedding dress sweeping the gravel like a battle flag. She was entering a lion's den and her only ally was the lion himself. But as she glanced at Elias, she saw him watching her with a strange, possessive intensity that suggested he hadn't just married her to save the pack. He had married her because he had been waiting for Julian to fail. The mystery was no longer why he had married her. It was how long he had been planning it. The wedding night was not spent in the heat of passion, but in the cold, strategic silence of the king's study. The sprawling estate known as Blackwood Manor felt more like a fortress than a home. While the rest of the world buzzed with the news of the replacement queen, Ellen sat in a plush velvet chair, still in her wedding gown, watching Elias move through the room like a shadow. The inciting incident didn't come with a shout but with a letter. A courier, dressed in the midnight blue livery of the High Council, arrived at 2 a.m. Elias took the envelope, his expression unreadable as he broke the wax seal. As he read, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. He tossed the parchment onto the desk in front of Ellen. "It seems my brother's ego has consequences far beyond your reputation," Elias said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Ellen picked up the letter. Her eyes scanned the elegant script. The High Council, the governing body of the 12 packs, was challenging the legitimacy of their marriage. Because the union between Ellen and Julian had been a sacred vow treaty, Julian's public rejection was being interpreted by rival alphas as a breach of the peace. More importantly, the council claimed that unless the marriage between Ellen and Elias was consummated and verified by a blood witness within 48 hours, the McLean throne would be declared vacant for transition. "They're using Julian's cowardice to stage a coup," Ellen whispered, the gravity of the situation sinking in. "If we can't prove the union is real, you lose the crown. And you," Elias added, leaning over her, his hands gripping the arms of her chair, "will be handed back to your father to be sold to the highest bidder to settle the debt. Or worse, given to the council as a ward." The threat was a physical weight. Ellen's mind raced. She looked at Elias, searching for a sign of hesitation, but found only a predatory focus. "How do we stop them?" she asked. "We play the game," Elias replied. "We host the Blood Moon Banquet tomorrow night. Every rival, every council member and my brother will be here. We show them a united front. We show them that you aren't a replacement. You are the prize I've been waiting to claim." But the night had one more shock in store. As Ellen retreated to the royal suite to finally shed the heavy silk of her gown, she found someone waiting in the shadows of the balcony. It wasn't Elias. "Ellen." The voice made her skin crawl. Julian stepped into the light, looking disheveled, his eyes bloodshot. He didn't look like the proud man who had stood at the altar. He looked desperate. "You have to come with me," Julian whispered, reaching for her arm. "Elias, he's dangerous. You don't know why he did this. He's been tracking your family for years. He didn't marry you to save you, Ellen. He married you because the Miller bloodline carries a dormant gene, a trait that can unlock the ancient alpha's strength. He's using you as a biological key." Ellen stepped back, her heart thudding. "And you weren't? You were marrying me for love." "I was trying to protect you," Julian hissed, his grip tightening on the balcony railing. "I rejected you so he couldn't have you. If we weren't married, the treaty was void and you could have run. But he took the bait. He jumped in. You're in more danger now than you ever were with me. Get out." A voice boomed from the doorway. Elias stood there, his coat removed, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. The sheer aura of power he projected made Julian stagger back. "Brother," Julian said, his voice trembling. "I was just telling her." "You were telling her lies born of your own failure," Elias said, walking into the room with a terrifying calmness. He didn't strike Julian. He didn't need to. He simply stood between Julian and Ellen, an unbreakable barrier. "If I see you near my wife's quarters again, I won't exile you. I'll let the pack laws handle a trespasser in the Queen's chambers. Do you understand?" Julian looked at Ellen one last time, a look of pity that felt like a slap, and vanished into the night. The room was silent, save for the crackle of the fireplace. Ellen looked at Elias, the seeds of doubt Julian had planted already taking root. Was she just a biological key? Was this entire rescue just another layer of a cold-blooded king's chess game? Elias turned to her. For a moment the mask of the king slipped, revealing a raw, jagged hunger that made her breath hitch. He didn't move toward her, but the air between them was electric, charged with a sudden, unexpected attraction that was as frightening as the political threats outside. "Do you believe him?" Elias asked, his voice a rasp. "I don't know what to believe," Ellen admitted. "I went from being a bride to a pariah to a queen in the span of an hour." Elias stepped closer, reaching out to touch the black diamond on her hand. "Believe this, Ellen. I don't do anything by accident. And I don't let go of what is mine." The first major twist had landed. The marriage wasn't just a scandal, it was a target. And the man who had saved her might be the very person she needed to be saved from. The sun rose over Blackwood Manor, but the light brought no warmth to the cold dread settling in Ellen's chest. The Blood Moon banquet was only 12 hours away. In that time she had to transform from a humiliated runaway bride into a formidable queen, all while navigating the shark-infested waters of Elias's court. But it wasn't just the court that was the problem. It was the king himself. Elias was a whirlwind of calculated movement. He spent the morning in war councils and legal briefings, but he had left Ellen with a team of handlers, stylists and protocol droids who moved with the efficiency of soldiers. Among them was Sarah Vance, a stern woman with eyes that had seen 3 generations of McLean alphas. "The king has requested you wear the McLean crimson tonight," Sarah said, draping a gown of deep blood-red silk over a mannequin. "It is a color of war, my queen. He is sending a message." "I feel like I'm being dressed for an execution, not a banquet," Ellen muttered, touching the fabric. "In this court they are often the same thing," Sarah replied. She paused, looking Ellen in the eye. "A word of advice. The king does not spoil his subjects. He equips them. If he is giving you jewelry and silk, it is because he expects you to use them as armor." Throughout the day the tension between Ellen and Elias grew, fueled by the mystery of Julian's warning. Every time she saw Elias in the halls, his presence was a magnetic force. He would stop, his gaze lingering on her for a second too long, before turning back to his generals. There was a growing, unspoken attraction, a pull of 2 souls caught in a storm, but it was haunted by the shadow of the ancient alpha gene. Was he truly protecting her, or was he just securing a vault? The first test of her growth came in the afternoon. While walking through the royal gardens, she was intercepted by Clara Thorne, the daughter of a rival alpha who had long been rumored to be the frontrunner for Elias's hand before the altar incident. "The accidental queen," Clara sneered, her eyes raking over Ellen's simple morning dress. "You look quite comfortable in Julian's brother's house. I suppose one McLean is as good as another when you're desperate for a roof over your head." The old Ellen would have flinched. She would have looked for Julian to defend her. But the weight of the black diamond on her finger felt different now. It felt heavy. Felt like a weapon. "One McLean is certainly better than the other, Clara," Ellen said, her voice dropping into a calm, regal register she didn't know she possessed. "Julian gave me a promise and broke it. Elias gave me a crown and the power to decide who is allowed to speak in my presence. Currently I find your voice grating." Clara's face twisted in shock. "You wouldn't dare." "I am the Queen of the North," Ellen interrupted, stepping into Clara's personal space. "And you are a guest who has forgotten her place. Unless you wish to explain to the king why you were harassing his wife, I suggest you go find your father and remind him that his trade agreements are currently sitting on my husband's desk." As Clara retreated in a flurry of indignant silk, Ellen felt a rush of adrenaline. She wasn't just surviving, she was evolving. But the mystery deepened when she returned to her room to find a gift on her pillow. It wasn't from Elias. It was a small, ancient-looking vial with a note. "The blood does not lie. Drink this before the banquet to hide the scent of the gene. They are coming for your life, not your heart. J." Ellen stared at the vial. Julian's warning or a trap? She couldn't trust the man who had abandoned her, but she couldn't fully trust the man who had claimed her either. As the hour of the banquet approached, Elias entered her chambers. He was dressed in a military-style tuxedo, the silver medals on his chest gleaming. He stopped dead when he saw her in the crimson gown. The dress was backless, clinging to her curves like a second skin, the black diamond necklace resting against the hollow of her throat. For a long moment he didn't speak. He walked toward her, the air thickening with a heat that had nothing to do with the fireplace. He stopped just inches away, his hand hovering near her waist, hesitant for the first time. "You look..." He started, his voice a rough growl. "You look like you could burn this entire kingdom to the ground. Is that a compliment, Elias? Or a warning?" He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. His touch sent a jolt of electricity through her, a visceral connection that made her heart race. "It's a fact. Tonight they will try to provoke you. They will try to make you feel like an outsider. Do not let them." He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. "And Ellen, whatever Julian told you, remember this. I chose to step onto that altar. I don't do anything I don't want to do." He pulled back, his eyes searching hers, and for a split second she saw a flicker of something that looked like genuine, terrifying vulnerability. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the mask of the king. "The council is waiting," he said, offering his arm. "Let's go show them why the North belongs to us." As they walked toward the grand ballroom, the sounds of violins and the clinking of crystal grew louder. But beneath the music, Ellen could hear the sharpening of knives. The tension was at its breaking point and the night was just beginning. "Before we step into the lion's den of the Blood Moon banquet, I have to know, who do you think Ellen should trust? The ex-fiancé who says he's trying to protect her, or the cold king, who just gave her the power to fight back?" Drop a comment below and let me know your theories. And if you're enjoying the rise of our queen, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the game-changing revelation in the next part. The grand ballroom was a sea of shimmering silk and sharpened gazes. As the doors swung open and the herald announced their arrival, a suffocating silence fell over the 12 most powerful families of the North. Ellen walked with her chin held high, her hand resting on Elias's corded forearm. The crimson dress flowed behind her like a river of blood. Every eye followed them, some with envy, some with calculation, but most with the predatory hunger of wolves waiting for a leader to stumble. Elias played the part of the devoted, possessive husband with a chilling perfection. Throughout the first hour he never left her side. His hand remained anchored to the small of her back, his touch heavy and territorial. He navigated the room with the grace of a shark, shutting down snide comments from council elders with a single look and introducing Ellen not as a guest, but as the final authority. "The Miller grain contracts?" Elias said to a sputtering alpha from the south. "You'll have to discuss that with the queen. She's handled the Miller ledgers since she was 18. I trust her judgment implicitly." Ellen felt the shift in the room. By delegating real power to her, Elias was doing more than spoiling her. He was making her untouchable. But the romantic heat between them was reaching a fever pitch. In the quiet moments between introductions, Elias would lean down, his breath warm against her temple, whispering the secrets and weaknesses of the people they were greeting. "See that man? Alpha Thorn. He's hiding a massive debt. Smile at him, Ellen. Let him wonder if we know." "You're a terrible person, Elias," she whispered back, a small, genuine smile tugging at her lips. "I'm a king," he countered, his eyes darkening as they dropped to her mouth. "There's a difference." But the night took a turn for the surreal when the High Council called for the traditional sharing of the chalice. It was a ceremony designed to test the spiritual bond of a new couple. In front of the entire assembly, Ellen and Elias were to drink from a silver cup containing wine laced with a drop of each other's blood. As the high priest stepped forward, Julian appeared from the crowd, his face twisted with a frantic desperation. "Wait," he shouted, his voice cracking. "This union is a sham. Elias is only using her for the first wolf lineage. He doesn't love her. He's planning to sacrifice her position once the blood rite is complete." The room erupted into whispers. Elias didn't flinch. He didn't even look at his brother. He simply looked at Ellen. "The cup is ready, Ellen. Do you trust me?" Ellen looked at the vial Julian had left her, still hidden in her clutch, and then at the man standing before her. She made her choice. She stepped forward, took the silver ceremonial dagger and made a tiny nick on her finger. Elias did the same. Their blood mingled in the wine. They drank. Suddenly, a shockwave of energy ripped through Ellen. It wasn't the wine. It was a physical sensation of heat and light that seemed to explode from her marrow. The room blurred. The air felt heavy with the scent of pine and ancient earth. She felt a connection to Elias that was no longer just physical. It was a bridge of souls. She saw flashes of his memories. The loneliness of the throne, the weight of the crown, and her. She saw a memory of herself from 5 years ago at a boring gala, laughing at a joke Julian hadn't even heard. And in that memory, Elias was watching her from the shadows, his expression one of profound, silent longing. The revelation hit her harder than any betrayal. He didn't just take me because Julian rejected me. He's been in love with me for years. But as the energy peaked, the high priest's eyes went wide. He pointed at Ellen, his hand shaking. "The mark. Look at the mark." On Ellen's shoulder, visible through the backless dress, a glowing golden sigil was burning into her skin. It was the mark of the ancient Alpha. Julian hadn't been lying about the gene, but he had been wrong about everything else. The mark only appeared when the carrier was paired with their true mate. The room went into an uproar. This wasn't just a marriage, it was a prophecy. Elias reached for her, his face pale with a shock he couldn't hide. "Ellen. You knew," she whispered, the world spinning. "You knew about the gene. Did you know we were mates?" Before he could answer, the heavy doors of the ballroom were kicked open. Not by guards, but by a group of men in tactical gear, carrying crests Ellen didn't recognize, the Black Rose. By order of the International Oversight, the leader shouted. "We are seizing the source for the safety of the 12 packs." Elias McLean stepped away from the woman. The Oversight was a shadow organization even the Alpha King feared. They didn't care about pack laws, they cared about containing power. And Ellen had just become the greatest power source in the world. Elias didn't step away. He pulled his wife behind him, his claws extending, his eyes glowing a lethal, predatory silver. "If you want her," he roared, the sound shaking the chandeliers, "you'll have to walk over the ashes of my kingdom." The betrayal wasn't from Elias. It was from the world they lived in. And just as Ellen realized she finally had a man who truly loved her, she realized she was now the most hunted woman on the planet. The ballroom, once a place of glittering pretense, dissolved into a theater of war. The Black Rose operatives moved with a chilling, mechanical precision, deploying gas canisters that hissed with a silver-laced mist, a sedative designed specifically to neutralize the heightened senses of a wolf. "Ellen, hold your breath." Elias's voice was a command that sliced through the rising panic. He didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion he swept her off her feet, his strength amplified by the true mate bond that now hummed between them like a live wire. But the Oversight was prepared for an Alpha King. They didn't target Elias with bullets. They targeted him with sonic frequencies that forced him to his knees, his hands clutching his head as he let out a guttural roar of agony. "Elias!" Ellen screamed, reaching for him, but she was grabbed from behind. It was Julian. He wasn't wearing tactical gear, but he was standing with the Oversight leader. His face was a mask of twisted, pathetic justification. "It's for your own good, Ellen. He can't protect you from them. If you stay with him, they'll burn the North to the ground to get to you. Come with me and I can negotiate your safety." "You sold us out," Ellen hissed, struggling against the iron grip of the guards. "You brought them here because you couldn't stand that he was better than you. I brought them here to save the packs." Julian shouted, though his eyes wouldn't meet hers. Elias, still reeling from the sonic attack, lunged forward with a ferocity that defied biology. He tore through two guards, his claws dripping with crimson, but a heavy blow from a silver-weighted baton caught him across the temple. He crashed into a banquet table, the fine china shattering beneath him. The leader of the Black Rose stepped forward, pressing a specialized dampening collar against Ellen's neck. The moment it clicked shut, the golden glow of the ancient alpha mark on her shoulder flickered and died. The soul-deep connection she felt to Elias was abruptly severed, replaced by a cold, hollow void that felt like death. "Take her," the leader commanded. "No." Elias's voice was a broken rasp. He tried to stand, his eyes bloodshot, his hand reaching out for her as she was dragged toward the service exits. "Elias," she cried out, her voice breaking as the heavy doors slammed shut between them. She was thrown into the back of a windowless transport van. The darkness was absolute. For the first time in her life, Ellen felt the true weight of being irreplaceable. It wasn't a fairy tale, it was a target. She was locked in a cage of high-tech alloy, her powers dampened, her mate miles away and likely bleeding out on the floor of his own palace. Hours passed in a blur of motion and terror. When the doors finally opened, she wasn't in a dungeon. She was in a high-tech medical facility, a sterile, white-walled nightmare. Julian was there looking like a ghost of the man he used to be. "They just want to study the gene, Ellen," he whispered, standing on the other side of a reinforced glass partition. "They'll find a way to stabilize it so it doesn't cause a war between the packs. Then we can go back to how things were." "There is no how things were, Julian," Ellen said, her voice dead and flat. "You didn't just reject me at the altar. You rejected your own soul. You're a coward, and when Elias finds you, and he will find you, there won't be enough left of you to bury." Julian flinched, but the lead scientist stepped forward, a man with cold, clinical eyes. The king is currently under siege by his own council, Mrs. McLean. They've declared him unfit to rule for bringing the oversight's wrath upon them. He is alone. He has no army, no crown, and no mate. You are all that is left of the McLean legacy. He pressed a button and a screen flickered to life. It showed Blackwood Manor surrounded by fire. The rival packs, led by Clara Thorne's father, were taking advantage of the chaos to storm the estate. Elias was shown on a grainy security feed, fighting alone in the courtyard, a dozen wolves closing in on him. He looked exhausted. He looked defeated. Ellen sank to the floor of her glass cell, the cold tiles pressing against her skin. The despair was a physical weight crushing the air from her lungs. She had finally found a man who cherished her, a man who had loved her from the shadows for years, and now he was dying because of the very power she carried in her blood. She closed her eyes, trying to reach out through the dampening collar, trying to find that thread of cedarwood and rain. But there was nothing. Just silence. Just the hum of the laboratory lights and the realization that she was a prisoner of her own destiny. Is this the end for our queen and her king? How much would you endure for a love that was written in the stars but cursed by the world? If you're rooting for Elias to survive that courtyard, let me know in the comments. We need all the hope we can get right now. And please, if you haven't subscribed, do it now. You won't believe how this darkest hour turns into a dawn of fire. As Ellen watched the screen, seeing Elias go down under a sea of rival wolves, she felt something flicker deep inside her. Not the ancient alpha gene. Something older. Something human. A cold, sharp spark of pure, unadulterated rage. They thought she was the prize. They thought she was the source. They forgot that a queen is only a queen because she is willing to kill to protect her king. The silence of the laboratory was broken only by the rhythmic, agonizing beep of the heart rate monitor attached to Ellen's wrist. On the screen, the feed of Blackwood Manor had gone dark, leaving only a haunting static. Julian had left the room, unable to look her in the eye after witnessing his brother's fall, leaving her alone with the cold-eyed scientists and the hum of the dampening collar. But they had made a fatal mistake. They treated Ellen like a vessel, a passive container for a genetic miracle. They forgot that the first wolf lineage wasn't just about power. It was about the will to survive. Deep within her, in the space where the collar tried to snuff out her light, Ellen felt a pulse. It wasn't the roar of an alpha. It was a steady rhythmic thrumming that matched the heartbeat of the earth itself. She realized then that the ancient alpha gene wasn't a lock to be opened. It was a fire that required a catalyst. And that catalyst wasn't blood. It was love. You think you've silenced him, Ellen whispered, her voice rasping against the sterile air. The lead scientist looked up from his tablet, a condescending smirk on his lips. The collar is absolute, Ellen. It's tuned to your specific frequency. There is no escape. You're wrong, she said, and for the first time she smiled. It wasn't a smile of joy, it was the baring of teeth. You tuned it to my frequency. But I'm not just Ellen Miller anymore. I'm a McLean. And my mate is still breathing. In that moment she stopped fighting the collar. Instead she reached into it. She visualized the bond, that thin golden thread of cedarwood and rain, and she threw her entire soul across it. She didn't call for help. She gave him her strength. Elias, wake. Miles away in the burning ruins of the Blackwood courtyard, a hand moved. Through the bond, Ellen felt a sudden violent surge of adrenaline. It was like a lightning strike hitting her spine. The dampening collar began to hum, then scream. The electronics in the room flickered. The scientists scrambled, shouting about unprecedented energy spikes, but Ellen didn't hear them. She felt Elias. He was standing up. He was shifted, not into a normal wolf but into something prehistoric, something colossal. The true mate bond didn't just share emotions. It shared existence. Back in the lab, the glass partition began to spiderweb with cracks. Ellen stood up, her crimson dress torn but her posture more regal than it had ever been at the altar. The collar around her neck grew red-hot, searing her skin, but she didn't flinch. "The king is coming," she said, her eyes glowing with a brilliance that blinded the security cameras. "And he's bringing the storm with him." Suddenly, the laboratory doors exploded inward. But it wasn't Elias who burst through. It was Sarah Vance and a small elite unit of McLean loyalists who had gone underground the moment the oversight arrived. "High Queen," Sarah shouted, tossing a silver-bladed dagger toward Ellen. The king has broken the siege. He is 10 minutes out. We're here to get you to the roof. Ellen caught the dagger in midair. She didn't wait for Sarah to reach her. She slammed the hilt of the blade into the control box of her collar. The feedback sent a localized EMP through the room, shattering the glass partition and sending the scientists diving for cover. The collar fell to the floor with a heavy clatter. The void in her soul was gone. The golden sigil on her shoulder didn't just glow. It erupted in a halo of light that filled the room. She could feel Elias's proximity now. He was a hurricane of fury approaching the facility. Julian. Ellen called out as she stepped over the glass. Julian emerged from a side office, looking terrified. He held a sidearm, but his hand was shaking so violently the barrel was dancing. Ellen, stay back. They'll kill us both if you try to leave. No, Julian, Ellen said, walking toward him with the terrifying calm of a true alpha. They'll kill you. I'm going home. She didn't kill him. He didn't have to. She simply looked at him with such profound pity that he dropped the gun and fell to his knees, finally broken by the weight of his own betrayal. She turned to Sarah. Is the king safe? He is unstoppable, my queen, Sarah replied, a grim smile on her face. He's currently tearing the front gates off their hinges. Ellen headed for the roof, her heart lighter than it had been in years. The turning point hadn't just been about escaping a cell. It was the moment she realized she was no longer a victim of her circumstances. She was the architect of her own vengeance. The air on the roof was cold and tasted of freedom. Below, she could see the headlights of 100 pack vehicles, but rising above them all was a silver-gray wolf the size of a small truck, leaping over the perimeter fences with a roar that silenced the world. The king had found his queen. And now it was time for the world to pay the debt. The roof of the oversight facility was a helipad suspended over a sheer drop of jagged rock and crashing waves. The wind whipped Ellen's hair across her face, the salt air stinging the burns on her neck where the collar had been. Behind her, the facility was a hive of sirens and shouting. In front of her, the darkness was being swallowed by the dawn, and by the approaching shadow of a god. The Black Rose leader, a man named Director Vance, stepped onto the helipad, backed by 4 armored sentries. He held a detonator in his hand. You think a mating bond can rewrite international law, Ellen? If that beast sets foot on this roof, I'll collapse the entire level. You'll both fall into the sea, and the Miller lineage will be buried under 1,000 tons of concrete. Ellen didn't move. She didn't look at the detonator. She looked at the horizon. You keep calling him a beast, she said, her voice carrying over the wind, resonant and cold. You keep treating us like specimens. But you forgot one thing about the north. A massive silver-gray blur cleared the edge of the roof. Elias didn't land, he impacted. The concrete beneath him cracked under the weight of a wolf that shouldn't exist. A creature of myth, eyes burning with a sentient, silver fire. He didn't growl. He let out a sound that felt like the earth itself was screaming in rage. The sentries opened fire. The silver-weighted bullets struck Elias's hide, but they didn't penetrate. The golden aura radiating from Ellen's mark was visible now, a tether of pure energy flowing from her to him. As long as she stood her ground, as long as her heart beat for him, he was invulnerable. Elias shifted mid-stride. It was a violent, bone-snapping transformation that left him standing in the center of the helipad, naked to the waist, covered in the blood of those who had tried to stop him. He looked like a fallen angel of war. Elias. Ellen started toward him, but Vance stepped in her path, his thumb hovering over the button. One more step, King, and she dies with me. Vance screamed. Elias stopped. His chest heaved, his muscles corded like steel cables. His eyes were fixed on Ellen, not with the coldness of a king, but with the raw, agonizing devotion of a man who had almost lost his soul. You want the power of the first wolf? Elias said, his voice a low, vibrating hum that made the detonator in Vance's hand shake. You want to know what it feels like to hold the sun? Elias reached out his hand to Ellen. He wasn't asking for her to be saved. He was asking for her to join him. Ellen bypassed Vance as if he were a ghost. She walked straight to Elias. The moment their skin touched, a shock wave of golden light erupted from the center of the helipad. The energy was so intense it blew out the windows of the floors below and sent the sentries flying backward. The ancient Alpha wasn't a single person. It was a union. In that state of total synchronization, Ellen could see everything. She saw Vance's fear. She saw the location of every operative in the building. And she felt the weight of the detonator. With a flick of her wrist, a movement guided by the sheer force of her will, the air around the device crystallized. The electronics froze, shattered by a localized burst of absolute zero temperature. Vance looked at his hand in horror as the detonator crumbled into dust. "High turn," Ellen whispered. She didn't use a dagger. She didn't use claws. She used the command of a queen. She stepped toward Vance, her eyes glowing with the authority of 10,000 ancestors. "Kneel," she commanded. The power in that single word was physical. Vance's legs buckled. His face slammed into the concrete, his body forced into a position of total submission by a gravity he couldn't fight. The other operatives fell as well, pinned to the roof by the sheer pressure of the true mate aura. Elias moved then, but not to kill. He walked to the edge of the roof and looked down at the gathering armies below, the rival packs, the oversight reinforcements, and the remnants of the McLean Guard. "The age of the 12 packs is over." Elias's voice echoed for miles, amplified by the bond. "There is only the North. And there is only the Queen. Anyone who does not swear fealty before the sun clears the horizon will be erased from the maps." One by one the headlights below began to blink out. The rival alphas, witnessing the power on the roof, realized the truth. They weren't fighting a king. They were fighting a force of nature. Elias turned back to Ellen. The fire in his eyes had softened into something deeply, almost painfully tender. He walked to her, ignoring the broken men on the floor, and cupped her face in his hands. His palms were warm, and for the first time they were trembling. "I told you once," he whispered, leaning his forehead against hers, "that I don't do anything by accident." "And the ring?" Ellen asked, her breath hitching. "The one that was already in your pocket at the cathedral?" Elias pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her like a fortress. "I've carried it for 3 years. I was waiting for him to fail you. I was waiting for the world to realize you were never his to keep." The final twist wasn't a betrayal. It was the realization that the Cold King had been the only one truly on her side from the very beginning. He hadn't rescued her from the altar. He had been the one waiting for her to finally arrive. As the sun broke over the ocean, painting the world in shades of gold and fire, the oversight facility was no longer a prison. It was the site of a new empire's birth. The battle was over. The debt was paid. And the girl who had been rejected at the altar was now the most powerful woman in the world, held fast in the arms of the only man who had ever truly seen her. The smoke from the Blackwood fires had long since cleared, replaced by the sweet, crisp scent of pine and the blooming jasmine of the reconstructed royal gardens. 6 months had passed since the night on the helipad, and the North was no longer a collection of bickering packs. It was a unified kingdom flourishing under a rule that was just as it was powerful. Ellen stood on the balcony of the master suite, the morning sun warming her skin. She wasn't wearing the heavy, restrictive silks of her wedding day. Instead, she wore a simple, elegant gown of cream-colored linen, the black diamond on her finger catching the light. The ancient alpha mark on her shoulder was no longer a burning brand. It had settled into a faint, shimmering tattoo of gold, a permanent reminder of the strength she had found in herself. A pair of strong, familiar arms wrapped around her waist from behind. Elias pulled her back against his chest, his chin resting in the crook of her neck. He smelled of cedarwood, rain, and the deep, contented peace of a wolf who had finally found his home. "The council is waiting," Elias murmured, though he made no move to let her go. "The Miller lands have reported a record harvest, and the South is asking for your guidance on the new trade laws." Ellen leaned her head back against his shoulder, closing her eyes. "Let them wait 5 more minutes. The Queen is busy." Elias chuckled, a low, rich sound that still sent shivers down her spine. The Cold King was a ghost of the past. To the world he was a formidable sovereign, but behind these closed doors he was a man who spent his evenings reading to her by the fire and his mornings ensuring she was spoiled with every comfort he could provide. He had kept his promise. He had never stopped cherishing her. "Julian sent another letter from the border colonies," Elias said, his voice dropping an octave. "He's asking for a pardon." Again. Ellen turned in his arms, her hands resting on the lapels of his charcoal suit. Julian had been exiled to the furthest reaches of the territory, stripped of his titles and forced to work the land he had once thought himself too good to rule. It was a mercy he didn't deserve, but one Ellen had granted to close the chapter on her old life. "Let him stay where he is," Ellen said firmly. "He needs to learn that power isn't inherited or stolen. Turned. Besides, I have no room in my life for ghosts." Elias's gaze intensified, his gray eyes softening with an adoration that still made her breath hitch. "You are far more merciful than I would have been, Ellen Miller McLean. But that is why the people love you. And why I am utterly lost without you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden box. Inside was a necklace, not of diamonds or emeralds, but of a rare, glowing moonstone from the heart of the northern mountains. "I saw this in the village yesterday," Elias said, fastening it around her neck. "It reminded me of the way the light hits the snow in the high peaks. Pure, resilient, unbreakable." Ellen touched the cool stone, her heart overflowing. She had once thought that being spoiled meant jewelry and status. She realized now that true spoiling was being known, being understood in the quiet moments and defended in the loud ones. The story that had begun with a public rejection had ended in a private, eternal devotion. She had walked away from a boy who wanted a puppet and found a king who wanted a partner. "Are you happy, Ellen?" Elias asked, his voice a whisper against her lips. "No," she replied, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "I'm much more than happy, Elias. I'm home." As they walked hand in hand toward the throne room to face the day's challenges, the world outside was vibrant and full of hope. The scars of the past had become the foundation of their future. "I've absolutely loved sharing this journey of transformation and love with you all. From the heartbreak at the altar to the triumph of the true mate bond, Ellen's story is a reminder that sometimes, the worst thing that happens to us is just the universe clearing the path for the best thing to arrive." What was your favorite moment? Was it the revelation of the king's secret love, or the moment Ellen took command on the roof? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We have so many more emotional, high-stakes stories coming your way that you won't want to miss. Thank you for watching, for your support, and for being part of this incredible community. Until next time, remember, you are irreplaceable. Ellen and Elias stepped onto the dais together, two halves of a whole, ready to rule a kingdom that was finally, truly theirs. The sun continued to rise, casting long golden shadows across the floor, promising a long and beautiful reign for the king and his queen.